University Baptist Church, we've intentionally looked at mental and spiritual practices that help center us, help us to be healthy individuals within ourselves, but also within our world. And what are those practices that we can take on and begin to implement as faithful people? Some of the speakers that we've had then have been kind of attuned to this. We've had a myriad of folks come to speak. Catherine Murphy, who was a spiritual director, came and spoke on what it means to abide in the life of the Spirit. We had Guru Ian Urquhart come just a few weeks ago to speak to us on the power of meditation. Father Vinny came to speak to us on the life of Christ and what that looks like. And today we have another special guest. In fact, this will be our last sort of guest speaker within this strain of well-being and sense of self practices. Bethany Davy comes to preach this morning. Just a bit about Bethany. She's a second-year divinity school student at the Methodist Theological School of Ohio, just up on Route 23. As you read in the bulletin, she's also a mom of 3, which keeps her certainly busy, and her partner, Josh, and her live in Clintonville. Both Josh and Bethany graduated from my alma mater, Anderson University, just a small town up in Indiana. We never really crossed paths. I graduated in 2000, she graduated in 2005. And so we missed one another and didn't really meet Bethany and Josh until Katie and I, my partner, were attending Columbus Mennonite. We were attending there and met Josh and Bethany, and they had us over some, I think 5 years ago. We were trying to think exactly when that was. As she's here, though, it's not just this connection that brings her here. It's also her work at Methodist Theological School of Delaware. She has studied, as I mentioned, it is her second year, and she has a certain study of body and trauma that's a part of her work. And so coming is by no accident. One of the things that I will mention about Bethany is that she has a spark. She has a certain joy in life, that among her busyness, a part of her, all of her many roles that she does, including improv at a comedy place called The Nest. Is it a comedy place? She does improv. That spark continues, whether she's a parent, a partner, a friend, even as she preaches, as she's here with us. That spark, and I hope that that continues. So Bethany Davy, we hear you gladly this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, for that introduction. My heart is full being here. What a joy to be here this morning with all of you, both in person and virtually. I'm filled with gratitude. As we enter into this sermon, I invite you into a moment of intentional presence. Please engage as you feel comfortable, honor your bodies throughout. But if you feel comfortable, I invite you now to close your eyes. I invite you to simply notice. Notice your breath, your inhales, your exhales. Notice the sounds in the room. Notice the sensations on your skin. Notice the smells that fill your nostrils. I invite you to notice your body, to check in with yourself, and notice any bodily sensations, any areas of tension, of fluidity, areas of pain, areas of numbness or disconnect. I invite you to, and I'm going to choose to do this, if you would like, to wrap yourself in a hug. If your body is able and that feels comfortable to you. I invite you to give yourself a squeeze, maybe rock gently back and forth. invite you to come back to your breath and to notice. Simply notice. And as you feel ready, I invite you to open your eyes, to bring yourself back to this space and back to this moment. Welcome to all. I want to begin by naming my social location as best as I am able, and to name that I speak from these particular aspects of my identity and formation. This is important for me to acknowledge as I am shaped by these pieces of my identity and the ways that I experience myself and community through them. I'm 40 years old. I am racialized as white, with ancestral ties to a variety of European nations. I was born into U.S. citizenship in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am a cisgender female, which means that the biological sex that I was assigned at birth also matches how I experience and express myself. I use she, her pronouns. Though I identify as queer, I am partnered to a white cisgender male, and so this facet of my identity and experience is not immediately evident. My partner and I have 3 white biological children, and we live in nearby Clintonville. I may be pointing in the wrong direction now, I've lost myself in here. Thank you all. Nearby Clintonville, a neighborhood with significant whiteness and wealth. Currently, our family experiences an upper middle class socioeconomic reality. I'm a graduate student at Methodist Theological Seminary in Ohio, and am part of the Columbus Mennonite Church community. All of these things and more inform my experiences and my perspectives, and as such, I feel an ethical obligation to name them today. It is also important to me to name the physical location, the land body on which we find ourselves and our bodies today. I want to acknowledge that through the ongoing violence of colonization, the land we call Columbus, Ohio, holds histories of genocide, ancestral land seizure, exile, and cultural erasure. These lands are, historically and presently, interconnected with those known as the Hopewell, Adena, Miami, and Osage, Delaware, Algonquin, and Iroquois peoples. We acknowledge the history and present realities of people and land, and the ways in which Indigenous peoples have always been and continue to be leading vibrant lives and working toward liberation. May we join in Indigenous-led body efforts for truth-telling, reparation, and healing. I begin with the historical and present realities of bodies, both my own and our collective land body, because bodies matter. We live bodied lives experienced within and through our bodied selves, among and within bodies of all in our community. Christianity, particularly modern Western Christianity, which is broadly the tradition in which we find ourselves today, has a particularly complex relationship with bodies, human and otherwise. Christian theology, and when I say that, I mean the way we imagine, talk about, and reflect upon God, has been used to justify harm to bodies. Christian theology has been used for the perpetuation of racial and ethnic terror, particularly toward the bodies of our Black, Indigenous, and people of color siblings. Christian theology has been used to justify the degradation of Earth's body and all bodies within. It has been used to justify the valuing of some bodies over and above other bodies, to justify our collective look away from systems of oppression that harm bodies and our complicity in their perpetuation. These systems of oppression, these isms, include racism, ethnocentrism, heterosex sexism, ableism, ageism, and more. One of the concepts modern Western Christianity and white Western culture at large has latched onto since the era known as the Enlightenment is dualism. Dualism professes that things are either this or they are that. They cannot be both. They cannot be neither. Dualism tells us things are either or. Dualism tells us that things are either good or they are evil. This ideology became particularly interwoven with concepts of body and spirit, claiming that they are two separate entities. A body that is evil, sinful, and a spirit that is good. I grew up in an evangelical fundamentalist Christian church and understood myself and all humans to be born into a state of depravity and sin. As such, I considered my body and my body's intuition and gut feelings to be of the body and therefore not to be trusted. Our church enthusiastically embraced the widespread sexual purity culture of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Purity culture's messaging coupled with other teachings affirmed this belief that my body was evil and not to be trusted. Only my spirit was good. As a female, a daughter of Eve, my body was furthermore that of temptress, tasked with hiding and restraining myself so that I did not cause my Christian brothers to sin. My female body was one designated for submission, not for leadership. And now, each time that I preach, a teeny part of me heals deep within. And I feel profound gratitude as I live into my fullness, my loudness, my bigness, my voice. Not only is dualism complicit in disintegrating the mind-body, spirit-body connection, dualism is also the backbone of systemic oppression. Poor or rich, male or female, black or white, natural or unnatural, good or bad. Dualism is at the heart of our present socio-political polarization, Democrat or Republican, pro-choice or pro-life, conservative or progressive, friend or foe, good or bad. Living within dualism is violent, as it creates the hyper-separation, us and them, and prohibits us from recognizing our deep inner connection with all bodies, including our own. Dualism allows no room for nuance, for multiplicity, for the tension apt to arise from our complex, bodied lives. The violence of hyper-separation from that and those we consider other turns in on ourselves. The us, them, and hyper-separations, which are much different than personal boundaries, mind you, we put up to keep ourselves in and keep others out, also create hyper-separations within ourselves. For example, I believe that as a white woman, whiteness causes a hyper-separation from human siblings racialized as people of color, and also a hyper-separation from and within myself. Whiteness asks me to sever from myself, to refuse emotional embodied sensations of empathy, anger, grief, inner connection. As such, I am apt to dissociate, to disembody, to block an awareness of my body below the neck, thus allowing white supremacy to persist unchallenged within and around me, preventing me from intuiting deeply within that my liberation is at stake as well. These walls, these hyper-separations, are dangerous. Sometimes our walls are constructed out of trauma as our body's way of necessarily guarding us, and those walls must be approached with profound tenderness and care. Sometimes our walls may be constructed out of bodied patterns or as a way to survive within the rapid pace and productivity demands of capitalism.
whatever their cause, these walls, these hyper-separations disconnect us from our own bodies and other bodies. And dualistic Christian theology that prescribes the body as evil and the spirit as separate and good has contributed to these notions of division. However, I propose that this is not the final verdict for Christianity. I believe that Christian theology also has had and continues to have the power to liberate, connect, and heal our bodied selves. Healing and wholeness, wellness and well-being become an intimately bodied matter. Our bodies, all bodies just as they are, matter. In John's passage, read just moments ago, we engage a resurrected, very bodied Jesus, interacting with the bodied selves of the disciples. Poor Thomas, forever to be remembered as doubting Thomas, forever held up as an example of who not to be. I feel connected to Thomas. I feel a kinship across the millennia with Thomas. Were I in that room, were I told that our dear friend and teacher had not only risen from the dead but was standing among us, I suspect I would have guffawed with discomfort and disbelief. I suspect that I too would have asked for a bit of proof. I may have even felt righteous in my demand, feeling that I were offering a due diligence that the others had failed to enact. Much could be said about Thomas, and much has been said about Thomas, about his doubts, about this moment of reunion with Jesus. Certainly, there is also lots to be said about the power of believing without seeing, about believing other stories without demanding evidence. I imagine how the terror and trauma of sexual violence might be differently engaged were we to take on a collective commitment to believing survivors without a demand of proof. And yet, it is another facet of this story on which I want to focus: the bodied self of resurrected Jesus. As Father Shannon Kearns reflects in the blog Queer Theology, an underemphasized aspect of this narrative is not only that Jesus appears to the disciples as a bodied human, but he appears as a bodied, scarred human. Even in resurrection, his body bears the marks of his bodied human existence, of his bodied violent execution. I find this very fascinating and wonder what it might signify. Kearns and others propose this passage demonstrates that our bodies matter. I have so often been told that my human female body is impure, flawed, and only redeemable in death when my perfect spirit joins a heavenly God. And yet, Jesus' scars demonstrate to me that perfection is not the goal nor the key, but perhaps fully embracing our bodied selves and the stories held within their scars is. This suggestion is reinforced throughout the New Testament of the Bible, in which Jesus is conveyed again and again as tending to human scarred bodies. Sometimes, though not always, Jesus enacts a miracle of physical healing, communicating that the body, the physical suffering endured, matters greatly and is worthy of alleviation. Jesus offers both an acknowledgement of the pain as well as physical repair. And even when physical healing is not offered, he tends to bodies in the here and now, honoring the lived, bodied realities of those in his midst. He is not recorded as saying, "Suck it up, power through, don't complain, ignore it," as many of us have been told or may tell ourselves. If Jesus himself is concerned with bodies, and Jesus himself is resurrected into a very human, very scarred body, how might that shift the ways we engage our bodies? If we believe that bodies matter, how how might that shift the ways we engage all bodies? Human, other than human, even Earth's body. It is in this realm that I believe children have much to teach adults about the mattering of bodies, as they are often deeply attuned to the comings and goings of their own bodies. Fascinated with, transfixed by, acutely aware of loose teeth, their wounds, their poops, their emotional experiences. This is a wisdom from which I have disconnected throughout the years, believing that I was too sensitive, too much. Perhaps you have done the same. As an adult, I can offer the kid self still within me the affirmation that I was beloved just as I was, living in profound connection with the mystery and the miracle of my very body life. I also wonder, how might our engagement with bodies be further altered by the passage shared from Genesis? Over and over we receive these words, and God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good. And God saw that it was good. Let's breathe that in. And God saw that it was good. In my own experience, this was not the part of the Genesis account that was emphasized. Rather, woven throughout the culture of my church was a hyper-emphasis on Genesis 3, in which Eve is portrayed as tempting Adam to join her in eating from the tree of life, an act that God had forbidden, an act described as leading to an earthly coexistence with evil. This moment, this act in Genesis, is sometimes referred to as the original sin, or more generally as original sin. The theological implications of emphasizing one of these Genesis chapters over another are significant. Fixation on the third chapter of Genesis without a parallel emphasis on the "and God saw that it was good" of Genesis 1 has led to the justification of all sorts of violence against women and femmes. And I say femmes here to include transgender women and feminine gender identities and expressions more broadly. These are the people who Christianity has considered the initiators of evil, the great temptresses, the people capable of luring all of humanity into a fallen existence. This theology is horrifically dangerous, as it is one of the theological roots of disregard for the feminine, the perpetuation of patriarchal systems, the disbelief of sexual violence survivors. This theology fuels the question, well, but what were they wearing? What were they doing? Were they under the influence? When femmes report sexual assault. This theology also fuels disconnect from the body. If we are, as is often professed, born into sin, then what are we to make of our bodies? How are we to engage our lived, bodied existence? Without cautious analysis, the belief that we are born into sin and into sinful bodies encourages a dualistic belief that the body is evil and only the spirit, the essence, the insides of us, must be what is of God and what is good. I have lived most of my life embodying this belief, and that has led to a distrust of and a disconnect from my body's messaging, my body's needs, my body's wisdom. I have disregarded my intuition, my gut, and have only begun reintegrating with my sacred holy body in recent years, and trusting that all of bodied me was created in God's goodness. I believe the work of bodying and re-embodying, of connecting and reconnecting deeply with our bodies, just as they are, is a profoundly sacred and essential practice. What does my relationship with my body become if I am created in original goodness? as one of my dear professors, Elaine Noguera-Gazzi, puts it. If we are created in original goodness, how does this affect our engagement with not just our own bodies, but with one another's? How does this affect my engagement with other than human animal bodies, plant bodies, all bodies within and among the earth? In original goodness, all bodies become holy and deserving of wholeness, integration, and deep care. Our bodies become locations of reverence and joy. We are interwoven into relationship with our own body and with all other bodies through God's good creation. As we know, this does not mean that our bodies are perfect or ought to be a specific kind of perfect, as we are socialized to believe in a society that reveres young, white, male, specifically abled bodies. But this does mean that our bodies are created good and that they matter just as they are. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." And God saw that it was good. Perhaps this emphasis on original goodness rather than original sin is making you squirm. Maybe it goes against all you have been taught and all that you have practiced throughout your life. Perhaps it brings up the same question for you that it does for a friend of mine. If we're created in goodness, then why do we need Jesus? This sermon does not allow for the theological reflection that question deserves. It is a question I continue to wrestle with myself. I so often experience a sort of theological domino effect when I address one theological perspective that subsequently makes me say, I wonder about another. Yet as I wrestle, my body tells me that being created in goodness matters. That a body resurrected with scars matters. And so I invite us to be present with all that arises within us when we consider bodies that matter, bodies that are created good. Let us move closer to our discomfort, to our questions, with curiosity, with welcome, with openness. And God saw that it was good. In recent years, social media has allowed for a more widespread recognition of the importance of bodies, particularly in the realm of social justice activism. Thought leaders and creatives are demonstrating the ways in which activism and surviving without attention to the body is neither sustainable nor desired. Black activist and author Adrienne Maree Brown recently released Pleasure Activism, bringing our attention to our bodies and the ways that experiences of joy, pleasure, play, and connection can be radical acts of resistance, especially for those told their or our bodies matter less than others. Self-proclaimed nap bishop Tricia Hersey creates public spaces for collective napping and is another Black femme declaring that rest is radical, especially for those told that their or our bodies are lesser deserving of rest, or that their or our bodies ought not to require the same amount of restoration time as others. Though it has been co-opted by white and global capitalism, self-care of the whole self, the whole body, has its roots in radical political movements and the recognition of the body and the body's sacred importance. Angela Davis and Erica Huggins of the Black Panther Party professed and practiced self-care while incarcerated and are some of the many Black women who have connected activism, creativity, and whole body care. Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led justice movements have long understood the ways our bodies and our bodied realities matter. These movements have often professed the inherent goodness of their members' bodies, as society at large has communicated the opposite. And God saw that it was good. And so, what does it mean to recognize the inherent goodness of our bodies, of all bodies? How might we trust that if a resurrected Jesus appeared with scars, that our stories, our scars, matter too? That our whole bodies, just as they are, matter. How might we engage our bodies and trust that God created them and that God said that they are good? Our relationship with our body, with all bodies, matters. May we be open to the holiness of bodies. May we be open to reconnecting with their sacred mattering. And God saw that it was good. As we close, let us be present with our bodies. Let us allow a few quiet moments of breath. Let us notice the sensations of our body in this moment. What needs stillness? What needs a little wiggle? Are there areas of tightness, of relaxation? Let us notice whatever is arising within us, whatever may be calling for heightened attention. I invite you to inhale deeply, feeling the expansion of your diaphragm as the air fills your lungs. I invite you to exhale, sending breath to any parts of your body that may be calling out for it. Inhale.